Well, my name is George Enderle. I'm originally from Switzerland. I have the endowed chair of the John Ryan Chair of International Business Ethics in the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, close to Chicago. I have to say this to my American friends who don't know where South Bend is, but now they learned that South Bend also has a candidate for the presidency in Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, okay, so good.
So I'm started my studies not thinking of business ethics at all. I was interested, I was involved in the Boy Scouts movement, and I was a leader, and what I liked was always teamwork of people who take responsibility to organize summer camps and so on. And then I learned a Jesuit who was very supportive, and I finally ended up entering the Society for Business Ethics and did my novitiate and my studies.
Stop. Go back. You're not the Society for Business.
It's a lovely faux pas.
You said the society. You had the Society for the Jesuits, right?
Jesuits.
Society of Jesus, you meant to say.
You said the Society for Business Ethics.
Yes.
So wait. So
yeah, that's not correct. Yeah.
So you say you
not
joined
yet.
Yeah. So you say it was wonderful, but
no, the Society for Jesus. Of Jesus. Yeah. Okay.
No, it's like Jesus.
Brackets and for business.
I've never heard of the Society for Jesus, so I'm going to learn a lot today.
These guys are the soldiers. Intellectual troops of the Vatican.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So you entered the.
So I was involved in the Boy Scout movement in Switzerland and was a leader and organized many summer camps. And I had the opportunity to meet a couple of Jesuits as chaplains. And so I got acquainted with the Society of Jesus, and I entered the novitiate, and I did the education in philosophy and education at Regency and theology. And during that time, I made a trip to India with two American friends of mine by car. And so we traveled about 100 days from France through the Middle East, through Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan and back around India and back. And that was for me a big eye-opener for the world, to the world. I was very interested in Europe, thinking about what happened during the First and Second World War. And we wanted to build up a new Europe, but I did not know that India and Asia and the third world countries are so important. So I came back and I told them I need to study economics. And so I did economics, a Ph.D. And then I left, during those studies, I left the Society of Jesus, but I still was working with them in a retreat house and on social issues. And so when I finished my PhD in economics, and that was on income distribution in Switzerland, a topic in the 1970s and today again, I was asked by the president of the University of St. Gallen, my home city, to come back to the home city. I wanted to avoid it, but he asked me to come back and to set up a Center for Business Ethics. And so I was really very happy to do that at the right moment in my life. And I could try to bring together my studies in philosophy and theology on the one hand and economics on the other hand. And he said, well, you have to write the second PhD, habilitation. And I said, oh, I'm not a book writer, but I did it. And I was very happy. And the topic was on poverty in Switzerland, in a rich country. And that was also quite shocking for many people. They said I was accused of publishing unethical data, although the data were very solid and proved by the Swiss National Foundation, Science Foundation. And so I built up that institute, or it was not an institute yet, a center. And I told the president at that time that I need to know what's going on in the United States. And he said, okay, here you have a budget, go. And so I traveled to the United States in fall 1982. And I met, I think, Pat also. I met Tom Donaldson. I met Richard B. George, Mike Hoffman, and many others. And that was for me a great experience. And when I went back to Switzerland, I told them, well, business ethics is being the process of being developed and established in the United States. And the professor of management answered, yes, of course, Americans, they need ethics. We don't need it. We practice that, So that was an interesting reaction. But I had the support by the president at that time. And he thought that business ethics has to be embedded, rooted in the business school and not in the philosophy department or outside business and economics. And so I got the support. By then we had a change of the president, and he tried many things to reduce business ethics again, but he was not successful. And in that process, I was asked by Notre Dame to come over the Atlantic. And so I started teaching business ethics and doing research in 1992 at Notre Dame.
When did you study with the Marquis-Sen?
I had a chance during my time in St. Gallen. I spent half a year with Amartya Sen at Harvard as a scholar. And I must say, intellectually, he has been my role model forever, because he was able to combine ethical analysis and philosophical reasoning. And so I discovered him already in his writings when I did my Ph.D. on income distribution, his small booklet on economic inequality. And then I invited him to St. Gallen also for a research symposium on ethics and economics. He could not make it, but for other conferences. And then the ISPI Congress in Tokyo, 1996. He came along with Hans Küng and others. So we became friends, and up to today, although he's getting a little bit older. But for me, that was a very important friendship, intellectual friendship and personal friendship, as it has been with many, like with you, Pat, over many years, and with Richard and Tom Donaldson and Mike Hoffman. And so that gave me, so to speak, the force and the strength to fight for business ethics in Europe. And I can say, well, Americans are a little bit advanced. We can do something, And well, it's difficult to assess the success, but I think the European Business Ethics Network developed quite strongly. And this year I went to Valencia to the 25th conference of EBN, and it was very beautiful to see that it's lively, and there are many Europeans involved in that. And as Richard said also in his interview, that then we started ISPE, the International Society for Business Ethics, for Business Economics and Ethics. And John Mahoney, who was the editor of the Business Ethics, a European review, said we should choose first business, Society of Business, and then economics, and then ethics. This is an ascending, not descending, but ascending methodology. That was the idea. And we tried to do that. And also, I think from the beginning, it was important for us to build bridges with practitioners and business. It was not just a pure academic enterprise, but we wanted to learn from business, and we thought we also can contribute to business and to help them clarify those ethical challenges.
So since you've been at Notre Dame, I know you work a great deal on international issues, and I read you as being working on macro issues. Can you explain your focus of research?
Yes. Well, my focus on research, I always talk, we have to walk on two legs. Given also a little bit my background, my educational background, but also when I could see what Henk and what many others did, that means to be has a certain competence in business on the one hand, and or marketing or management or economics on the one hand, and in philosophy or theology. And so I tried always to walk on those two legs, to take both sides into account. And I call my approach as a problem and action-oriented approach to business ethics. And I learned a lot in my study on poverty in Switzerland, because just to talk from a point of view of ethical principles that poverty is bad is not does not reach the people. So that's why I needed numbers. I needed clear definitions. I needed what is wrong now. And so social sciences for that analysis was very important. And I spent a lot of time to ask how to identify the problem in business ethics in terms of ethics and in terms of social sciences. And then how to analyze it. And third, action-oriented, what kind of specific contributions can we make given our analysis, how we identify the problem. And then I used this framework for my students. They had to write research papers with those 3 steps. I have hundreds of papers. I cannot read all of them anymore, but I think they learned something, how to identify the problem, how to analyze, understand the problem, and third, what should we recommend to solve the problem. Yes, even with Henk van Looy and Jack Mahoney and Horst Steinmann and Jean Musset in Paris, and also with Italians, later on Lorenzo Zacconi joined us, we were very clear that business ethics has to be serious, well-founded theoretically on the one hand, and at the same time addressing practical issues, challenges, what can we contribute to improve business. And I think that was a clear commitment and a vision we had without articulating that very clearly. And only later on we realized that we wanted to do that, but it happened. That was very interesting. Yeah. So my research, in a way, is a further development of my interests in poverty on the one hand and human rights on the other hand. And so I discovered that poverty alone is not enough. What does it mean, wealth? What is a rich, wealthy country? And example for me is always Switzerland. And what makes a country rich? And so I developed in many papers a comprehensive concept of wealth creation. And I applied that also to China to see how it works in China. And I think it gives us very clear directions. And on the other hand, with my study on poverty and human rights to a decent livelihood, I was very fascinated by John Ruggie and the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And so I've been working that. And what I'm now in the process of finishing a manuscript of a book called Corporate Responsibility for Wealth Creation and Human Rights. So that means to bring together a more economic perspective with wealth creation and the ethical perspective of human rights in a global context. And what does that mean, not just for governments and for macro issues, but for companies, the ethics of business organizations. So that is something which I'm in the process of finishing. And what an interesting experience is, I didn't want just to publish a series of old papers, but to try to find synthesis or to bring those different pieces together. And so I will see if I can make a contribution.
I think you probably can. So how do you see the field today, the field of business ethics?
I think, I'm happy that what has happened, to see many things in the last 30 years or 40 years since '82. And I think one thing is that a huge group of friends who do business ethics in the Society for Business Ethics, and even in the International Society for Business Ethics, and that we want really to address important issues. And I think we could do a number of things. But I'm also concerned that many friends of mine do not have the support by the by the business schools and by the universities. I also have had interesting experiences. In Switzerland, I was supported for a couple of years and then not supported, and at Notre Dame it went up and down a little bit. And so today we are very happy to have a new dean who is very supportive, and I think that's very important to build up the field. A second thing is what has been for me always, maybe by nature, that I'm interested in international issues. And I think we cannot do business ethics without looking at the international and the global context. And that is fascinating. It is to understand what's going on in China, in terms of economic reform, or in terms of now building up a Chinese business ethics network, and what is the role of human rights in China and in business. These are fascinating things. But we face also a number of challenges, and I don't feel very competent in that regard. And one is artificial intelligence and how to deal with the digitalization of the economy. I think here we face very serious issues and need really cooperation to address that with the help of practitioners and philosophers and social scientists. Another thing, of course, is global warming. And I had a recent talk with some friends of mine. I think we were very early on. And Pat Murphy, for instance, my friend at Notre Dame, did his Ph.D. on environmental issues in the 1980s. So, but today it's still very important, and we know how urgent global warming is today. Another important perspective, which I would like to help also after my retirement, help to develop, is to help people in Africa. Africa is a continent which has the youngest population in the world. And I have some friends in Eastern Africa, and I think they need our help. And so I hope that with the Society for Business Ethics and with friends in Europe, and maybe even in China, we can do something, provide some help in that regard.
So what kind of help would that be?
That would be first to help them identify what are urgent challenges in Africa, and that means, for instance, how to deal with the informal economy, not just the formal economy, but the informal economy. And a friend of mine, Peter John Opio, who is now back in Uganda, is working on that. Another issue is, and we had at Notre Dame 6th time, this so-called YALI program, which means Young African Leadership Initiative, which was started by IBM and the Obama administration. And every year they invited 500 scholars or young people, 25, 30 years old, entrepreneurs, to study challenges in Africa. And so Notre Dame was involved in that program with 25 every year. And I think they need support what they do, and also that the ethical dimension can be addressed more explicitly.
So how do you see the future of business? What do you think it's going to look like in 10, 20 years? We're still going to be the thinking, or different people, different philosophies, or how do you see the future?
Well, I'm optimistic, yes, but I'm also not so sure how it will develop. I think there are many issues which are not so clear, and but I think the need for interdisciplinary work among scholars on business ethics and also with practitioners will remain an important thing, and I'm happy about that. And I also know that young people, emerging scholars, are very interested in interdisciplinary approaches, and also international. They are pretty international. And so that is another point which gives me hope. I not sure if we get enough support from the economists on the one hand and from philosophers on the other hand. I mean, when the Society for Business Ethics was started, we had famous philosophers, like Richard D. George and you and Tom Donaldson, and so it is important that the philosophical leg of business ethics gets stronger, not reduced by just behavioral business ethics.
Gretchen, did you have any questions?
I have a question about your interaction with businesses
Yeah.
during your career.
Yes.
Has it been useful? What businesses have you worked with? What's been the outcome?
Yes. Well, it was interesting when the president of the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland started that idea of business ethics. There was a lot of interest among businesses. And so I was invited many times by Siba Geige, afterwards Novartis, by BMW in Munich. We had seminars for managers in the mountains, and they wanted to know how what is ethics and how relevant and how can we make it relevant in practical business. And so on the one hand, I had that support, we had that support. On the other hand, there were people who said, well, that was a former president of Nestle at that time, business ethics is just soft talking, and it does not deal with important issues. We can dispose of that, so to speak. So we had both reactions, And but Henk van Looy, he was very involved with business in ING, with the bank ING, and with many other companies. The same thing was true with Horst Steinmann or with Jean Mousset in Paris. And so we had a good relationship and a working relationship. When I came to the United States, I stopped this kind of activities because first, my English was not so strong, and second, I thought I don't understand the culture of American companies enough, and I'm willing to help other people. So I was very happy that Mike Hoffman was so involved with the Ethics Officer Association, and I was working with him there. But my limitations were very clear to me, and so I was more focused on working with scholars in theoretical but also practical issues, problem-oriented issues, and then of course more and more in China. And there again, I got some cooperation with Chinese companies, very good cooperation, and also with foreign companies doing business in China. It was highly interesting, and I learned a lot of things, but I was not a consultant. I was not competent enough to do that. But I was interested, and so that helped me also in my discussions at Notre Dame when we discussed the Notre Dame policy of the supply chain, if we should buy Notre Dame logo licensed products from China. I said, I know many good Chinese companies, and we have to work with those. They have worker participation, they do a lot for their workers. We need cooperation with them. And I could have some success, not a complete success.
Can I ask you a follow-on question leads from that? You mentioned interdisciplinary with academic
Yes.
colleagues. You mentioned your interactions with business, but what you touch on there is business ethics and its engagement with the political sphere, with both a capital P and a small
Yes.
p. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes.
Over how you've seen it develop over?
Yeah. I'm a son of a politician, and so I think he was mayor in my hometown, and I think politicians are important, and policymakers. And but I did not work directly with politicians, and for a couple of reasons. In Switzerland, I knew exactly what I had to say and how to deal in a foreign country is a little bit more difficult. And being in China, it's even more difficult. So in China, it was interesting that many scholars and also leaders in China applauded business ethics in China because it was not political. So they said, yes, business has to improve. There are lots of problems, and we need ethics and professors in ethics to support that. And even I had talks on human rights, in business in the most recent years. So in a way, not to talk about politics was, I think it was a smart policy, but it did not mean that I kept silent, So when I was teaching at the China-Europe International Business School in Shanghai for 8 years, we had a policy not to talk about politics and religion, And I said, okay, but if the students ask me questions about that, I will tell them what I think. And we had many good discussions, and I had never problems with that. But I mean, it was interesting that of course, business and economics is closely related to politics and policymakers. But I think we have to distinguish that. And some people can do it very well, and I don't feel so competent in a foreign country.
Oh, can I ask one more question on this part? So then, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't talk about sex. That's our dinner table rules. But religion, the religious, your country, your background, and many others. What role has, say, some of the religious treatises, the stuff coming out of the Aram, that sort of thing? What influence has that had on business ethics and the study discipline?
I think there are 2 points. One is in terms of spirituality. And as I said, my training, my education was in Ignatian spirituality, and that is very practice-oriented with a strong theoretical foundation. And so I think spirituality in business ethics is an important issue. It has become important in the last 5-7 years, and I think we should do more. And that does not mean just Christian or Buddhist spirituality, but it can be any spirituality. But it is understanding of a broader meaning of an ultimate reality which shapes our behavior and so on. And the second thing, shortly after I arrived in Notre Dame in 1992, in Chicago, in the Palmer House, there was that Congress of the World's Religion, the Parliament of World's Religions. And it was 1993. And Hans Küng proposed the world ethos with those 4 directives, new directives, which means a culture of non-violence, not killing, a culture of honesty, not stealing, a culture of partnership in genders, not to commit sexual immorality was called. And so those 4 directives, and I think when talking about business ethics in the global context, we need to include global world religions. World religions play an enormous role in the global world, in the global economy and politics. And from a European background perspective, I think we are extremely cautious to address religious issues. We don't want to sound pious, devout to be. But when we look at the global context, religions play a role if we like it or not. And so Islam, how to understand Islam, I was in Iran. I had a scholar, a mufti, who had also a Ph.D. in economics. What does it mean, business ethics in Islamic banking, etc.? So lots of important questions.
Excellent, thank you.
Good. Any other issues?
I'm intrigued by some of the companies you mentioned. So Ciba-Geigy, Novartis. Today, I think people would say Novartis has a strong base for ethical practice, and they've been a leader across the business side of this for a long time. What impact do you think your early conversations, if any, have had on the development of that particular, let's just take that example, that particular company's commitment to business ethics over the years?
Yes. Well, I mean, I can say something about Switzerland and Germany. Switzerland and Germany. In Switzerland, we had some environmental scandals, you know, before Ciba-Geigy and then afterwards Novartis was changed. And the president of Ciba-Geigy was an outspoken advocate for business ethics. He supported also the European Business Ethics Network. He's like today Paul Polman, formerly president and CEO of Unilever. So we had that support. We had also the support of the media, quite a strong support of the media. They said, yes, that's important and we need change in business. And in Germany, particularly, they founded early on the German Network for Business Ethics, and they had worked with Lufthansa and with many other big companies, and they established an award, a Business Ethics Award, every 2 years for good companies like Chibo and many others. So I think we had some good progress, but we should have done more, you know, and it's an unfinished job, absolutely.
One other question, because you've talked about your work in Africa and in China. Who are the young or existing scholars in that space? We talked a little bit about people who you have known and worked with here, but as you think about the global network, who are some of the other thinkers in this space, academics in this space that you would identify?
Well, in China, my connections were very close to Professor Lu Xiaohe at the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, who was a visiting scholar at Notre Dame in '95, and she went back and she did everything she could to promote business ethics in China, with more than 30 publications, books in Chinese, translations of works of Americans and Europeans, but also many works by Chinese. Another friend at Chiao-Tung University in Shanghai is Zhu Chengzhou. He is professor of business ethics, and he started the Association for MBA Professors in Business Ethics in China, which is a network of about 120 professors in China. They meet every year. In Africa, I have connections with particularly East Africa, but also South Africa. Dion Rousseau, and Daniel Malan and Ollie Williams was very involved in South Africa, and the focus on how to address the issues after apartheid and corporate governance. With a good friend of mine is now vice chancellor of a university in Uganda, in Gulu, Peter John Opio, who has a Ph.D. in business ethics from the Catholic University in Louvain, and he was a professor in London and then at Notre Dame, and is now back. So these are some good examples, but Africa is a huge continent with 53 countries, you know. So what does that mean? And in a way, I'm happy that at Notre Dame we now have this called the Keough School of Global Affairs, which is a new school, like a law school and a business school, with about 35 or 40 professors to address global issues. And important focus is on Africa. And we invite every year 25 people particularly from Africa, also Central Africa, Central Asia, South Asia, and so on. So that is not directly business ethics, but I'm trying to bring in the ethical dimension into those work and education programs.
So your work goes on, right?
It goes on. Mohamed Yunus was at Notre Dame last year, the founder of the Grameen Bank. We invited him, with Cecilia Arruda from Sao Paulo, myself, we invited him for the ISPI Congress in 2000. That was 6 years before he got the Nobel Prize.
Yes.
And so he came last year to Notre Dame for an award. And then we asked him, you are now 80 years old, what about retirement? And he said, retirement is a term which should be abolished. I'm not retiring, I'm just changing my activities. And I thought that's a good idea.
Good. Well, thank you very, very much. This
Can
was
I
terrific.
ask you one quick question?
Yes.
Of the pioneers, the people who forged the way, who were most important to you? We asked the same question to Richard. Who do you think were most important to you personally?
Well, I mean, as I said, from my interest in finding, integrating or building bridges between economics and ethics is certainly Amartya Sen since the 1970s. And since the 1980s, as I said, it was Richard D. George, it was Peck. Also, you know, that emphasis on employee rights. I thought that is very important in America. I thought it was the implementation is closer in European countries, say in Germany, where we have the co-determination, which is unheard for an American company. And then Tom Donaldson also, you know, and Mike Hoffman, that certainly, and then some younger, also, of course, that Tom Dunphy was very supportive for ISPI also to get Indians involved. Narayana Murthy from Infosys, and then to connect with people from the Global Reporting Initiative in the Netherlands. I thought it was a combination of friendships and then the use of the internet and email. We needed both, you know. Not only friendship, but we needed the internet to communicate quickly and to prepare our conferences and meetings. And that worked pretty well and was very reliable.
Explain to the camera who Tom Dunphy was.
Tom Dunphy was professor of legal studies at the Wharton School. And he early on was thought that the Wharton School should have a business ethics department of legal studies and business ethics. And so he came a couple of times also to Europe, and we discussed that how to do it in Europe. I think we were advanced in terms of research, but not advanced in terms of institutionalizing business ethics in universities and business schools. And Tom Dunphy did a lot to promote that, and then he hired Tom Donaldson from Georgetown, I think at that time, to go to the Wharton School, and so we became friends, and he passed away about 10 years ago, I think, already. Yes, but that was another friend who was important for us.
Can I ask then one last question, if I can sneak it in, about the current young people today?
Yes.
Are they more ethically aware now, do you think, than the previous generations? And do you have faith in it? Do you have faith in the future, given their...
Yeah. Well, I think the awareness is very strong. I mean, I'm impressed, not only the scholars now in business ethics, but even the students. I have a sophomore from originally Zimbabwe, who was a refugee, went to South Africa with the parents. He came to Notre Dame, he got that grant. A few weeks after he arrived in Notre Dame, he said, I want to study ethical issues in the mining industry in South Africa. And so I said, I'm happy to help you. And we did a lot of readings for the World Bank about mining and so on. And then he went back to South Africa and did empirical research and is writing now. And he's now a junior. And I mean, this kind, and I could mention other examples of young students. He has a double major, in finance and political science, and is doing this kind of research in addition. And they are motivated. I mean, there's no doubt. And this is great. I mean, to see the young generation is really full of fire. Yeah.
Any final observations or comments that you want to share with us?
Well, I think we can learn a lot from the history of business ethics, you know, and we have some publications about ISBE, the history of the International Society of Business Economics and Ethics, and I'm very pleased that you are doing this research study on the history and development of business ethics here in the US and worldwide. I think it's not just to look back, of course, you know, but to see what are really important things. And we can say a couple of important things are very clear today, you know. So, for instance, ethics has to be integrated in business education from the first year on, you know, with freestanding courses on the one hand and integrated courses on the other hand. And we should support also a project which a friend of mine has been advancing now for a number of years. It's called Responsible Research in Management and Organizations. And it is a vision for 2030. And so that business schools look at what kind of research are we doing? Is it useful, credible for society or not? And the Society for Business Ethics and we in the field of business ethics can be only happy about this and to try to work together with our colleagues in the business schools for that purpose.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.